welcome to Barren Interviews, where we're going to be talking with Jason Harris today, a poet and writer who I have had a brief time knowing a relationship. My name is Brandon Noel. I should introduce myself. I'm a contributing poetry editor for Barren Magazine. I recently joined up with them back in June, and it's been an amazing time, and I just got on in time to be able to be a part of the issue that featured Jason's work. And so we have him here on the show today. How are you doing, Jason?
I'm doing well, Brandon. Thank you for asking.
Well, we don't have a lot of time. We want to try to get as much in as we can for people to be able to get to know you better and your work, your piece. And first off, before we get to it specifically, I'd like to ask you, how did you come to poetry as your artistic expression? How did you fall in love with it, or how did it seduce you?
Yeah. So whenever I think about my relationship to and with poetry, I always find myself leaning on something that one of Toni Morrison's characters said in the novel Jazz. And the character said that, don't think I fell for you or fell over you. I didn't fall in love. I saw you and made up my mind. And for me, when I think about my relationship to poetry, it wasn't something that I fell in love with. It didn't seduce me. I have always been interested in explanation and synthesizing information and narratives and stories. And for me, poetry was the thing that allowed me to synthesize and to narrate and to explain myself. And so I like to think that, when I met poetry, I made the conscious effort to fall in love with it. So it wasn't something that just happened. I had to conscientiously say, this is the thing that I'm going to write, and this is what I wanted to do. So it took a little bit more control than it did seduction.
Jason, your poem, What I Mean When I Say I Am Sad, it has this wonderful repetition to it. My heart is a boomtown, a lagoon. And there's a lot of amazing visual connotation to that for me. Like when I think of a boomtown, these explosive, I think of oil barons and expansive kind of tent cities in the, the Texas oil fields. And it's not something that I was expecting to think of in relation to a heart. And I wonder for you, is that some of the meaning you meant to kind of put into that, or where that specific phrase, boomtown, that I really wanted to kind of pull that out of you and see more of what you were kind of wanting to hit with that phrase?
Yeah, so that phrase actually has been in my idea notebook for over a year now. I was sitting in my car at a stoplight, just thinking about things, because I was deep in the process of working on my manuscript, which deals a lot with nature and pollution and society.
Mm.
And so, I think one of the things that I struggle with is my desire to have things, and having certain things, not having certain things, having anything that we do have has some kind of effect on the environment in some way. And so in that line particularly, my heart is a boomtown, a lagoon, I was actually thinking about the ecosystem and pollution, because I don't remember where I was headed, but I was going to ride my bike there. But then my bike had gotten a flat the day before.
Mm.
So I ended up taking my car. And so from there, I just started to feel like, you know what, I could have just put this off, fixed my bike, and then, used a different mode of transportation. And so that image, that line in particular, when it came to me, I was grappling with my need to be where I needed to be, but also my desire to make better choices about what I'm doing to the earth. And so that, my heart is a boomtown is me, um, is me conflicted with the choices I make as a citizen in the 21st century, knowing what I'm doing to the environment and to the ecosystem.
It says a lot about the dichotomy of the language, where you have Boomtown, which evokes all this artificiality, all this constructed, built by the hands of men and women, and versus a lagoon, this kind of placid piece of nature. And I think that what's beautiful about the entire piece is encapsulated and in that repetition. And that's why I love that it comes back. And it comes back. It keeps kind of centering you as the reader. When we were taking it in as editorial group, I fixated on that and I thought about it. I didn't know it was your piece, and I was kind of delighted. And I was like, oh, this is it's so perfect. But for me, more than like the meaning, like when you talk to a poet, I like to know where you were physically, emotionally, the kind of frame of mind you were in as it began to take shape. So you had this inspiration moment, but as it began to kind of take shape as a poem, can you talk to us about your headspace or where you were at that time?
Yeah. So I'll take you just on a short journey. I moved to Cleveland, Ohio from West Virginia in 2014. West Virginia is largely wooded area. So there wasn't, you don't see your typical skyscrapers, your skylines. There's none of that. It's just trees and hills. And when I moved to Cleveland, I realized that I was in a state of shock because of my geographical understanding of things. So I went from this wooded, hilly area to the city where there isn't a hill in sight unless I go, 15, 20 minutes away from where I live. And I remember once driving on the interstate. This was a couple of years after I moved to Northeast Ohio. Um, and the interstate I was on also overlooks Lake Erie. And so I was driving on the interstate looking over Lake Erie. And then I just felt myself feel guilty or feel, I don't know what I felt then, but after a couple of years of going to counseling and therapy, I realized what I was feeling was a sense of eco anxiety. And so I am often anxious and depressed about what is happening to the planet or on the earth. Um, and so a lot of this poem is me mentally, again, trying to grapple with being okay um, with what I'm doing personally. And then when I think about it on a larger scale, I think there's a line in there where I talk about all 7 million people everywhere. That's me trying to wrap my head around how many other people there are that could be like me, who they have this idea about climate change and global warming and what it's doing. But the system that we live in, which is this capitalistic, fast-paced monster that it's hard to step away from or step out of, um, that is essentially where my head was in this poem. I mentioned earlier "My heart is a boomtown." That line is over a year old, but I didn't find a way into a poem from that line until after I read Elizabeth Colbert's book, The Sixth Extinction. So I mentioned in the first question, how did I fall in love with poetry? And I mentioned it had to be a choice for me. Sort of like this line, it came to me over a year ago, but I had to find my way into what that line wanted me to do. And it wasn't until I finished reading The Sixth Extinction, which is over 300 pages, where I was able to discover the kind of language and the emotional register that I needed to write the poem.
Uh, I think that it's a powerful piece overall. I was moved by it, and I know that the editorial staff uh, was moved by it. And you went about such a beautiful way talking about it. My mentor, when I was in college, used to say, "If you ask me what my poem is about, I'll tell you a story about my shoes." And you kind of reminded me of him when we got talking first. You tell a story about a bike, which the bike doesn't appear in the poem. And I think that poetry is at its best to talk about when you talk in and around it, but not a didactic, like, let's go line by line and get into everything, but that the poem, as you said, is the distillation, and that you see your work in it as a distillation and a synthesizing of language and your anxieties and feelings. I come from Florida. I grew up in the South. And the last time I visited there, I wrote a piece that I felt like shared what you just said, which is when you came up, you had this anxiety. I wrote this feeling of like the sky feels much more open here. And in Ohio, I always feel like I'm crowded in. I always feel like everything is crowding in on me, and I feel suffocated sometimes with that. So I shared that anxiety. But as we kind of wrap this up, you mentioned earlier that you're working on a full-length book that's forthcoming. Can you tell us a little bit about your work on that, and when can we expect to see it?
Yeah, so my forthcoming book is hopefully will be coming in 2021. It'll be published by 12 Arts Press, which is a press here in Cleveland, Ohio. Um, the collection of poems that I'm writing are interested in what I like to consider the in-between. And so what I mean by that is the poems are interested in the space and the experience between both human and non-human entities. So in the collection, there are many, many different types of animals that make an appearance. There are a lot of birds. Um, and a lot of what the poems are doing are they are investigating what it looks like or what it means for us as human beings to act and behave the way that we do both on and to the earth. But then the in between comes with also how the earth is reacting to our behavior. And so there's an ecological concept that grounds the book, and the term you might have heard of it is called edge effect. And edge effects are essentially when two different types of ecosystems overlap with one another. And so think of you have two circles, you push them together, and then I can't remember the name of it, but it has that space in the middle.
Venn diagram?
Yes, the Venn diagram. So the center of the Venn diagram, when we're looking at edge effects, is what's considered the ecotone. And the ecotone or the edge effect is where you have species from one space and a species from another space coexisting. And so when you have that ecotone, you have not only the two species from both organisms, but then it creates a whole nother another kind of species. And so what the book is really investigating or pushing toward is, what does it mean to be in the center of that Venn diagram? What does it mean to be in the ecotone? What does it mean to be in the in between? And so I think right now we are in a psychological shift as humans about what we're doing and the ways we are behaving. to the planet, to the ecosystem, to other non-human beings. And so that's largely what the collection of poems will be grounded around. I don't have a title yet. I thought I did. But the more that I'm starting to shape it and close in on my research, I'm realizing that the title that I once had it's grown beyond that. And so yeah, so that will be out in 2021.
Well, I'm really excited to see that. I consider myself somewhat of a science nerd, like amateur. I like to absorb a lot of that information when I'm not reading poetry and things like that. So I'm fascinated by this concept. It's a heady concept. Like I can like just from you explaining it to me, and I'm trying to like take in these new terms and these new ideas. I love this the synthesis again. This comes up of science and kind of anthropology and sociology and poetry, like how to make it a science poetics, like a
Mm,
merging of the in its way. It's also one of these edge effect things. You're taking two practices, two schools of thought, and putting them together in a new way, creating something new yourself. So in an interesting way, you're participating in the very thing that you're wanting to exemplify and study. So I'm excited about it, just as a just as a fan of your work and as a fan of poetry in general. I'm glad that you could be here with us today. I'm glad that we had your piece and made a home for it with Barren, and I can't wait to see what new things come in the time between now and when your book comes out.
awesome. Thank you, Brandon. I really appreciate it. And hopefully when things calm down, we'll be in the same space again at some point.
I look forward to the day that we can meet up at a reading again soon. I miss those dearly.
Oh man, thank you.